So my name is Dilnaz Bilamoria. I'm from the ancient Zoroastrian faith. My name is actually, it has a meaning. So Dil means heart and Naz means charm. So I'm the charming heart. Often in Australia, as we shorten names, as we are wont to do, my full name, Dilnaz Bilamoria, often becomes Dil Bil. So a lot of people do call me by my acronym, but it is an absolute pleasure to be here today. And the subject that I chose to speak on, I think is really important because for the 25 years that I've been in this country, I have always been hearing, and this is from government, all levels, this is from community organizations, this is from corporate, that, certain communities are hard to reach. It's basically putting the onus or responsibility on us as marginalized communities. It could be, on the basis of age, gender, it could be on the basis of our culture and faith, it could be on the basis of our socioeconomic backgrounds or our languages. But there is always this label which seems to be plastered on our foreheads saying hard to reach. It is as though we're not wanting to be part of mainstream conversations. It's like we're not wanting to put up our hand and participate in discussions that would support and benefit everyone. And that got me thinking that it's not really hard to reach. I need to flip this over and call it hardly reached. What are these government organizations, these institutions, corporate, community? What are they doing to actually reach out to us as marginalized communities? And today, the marginalized communities, for this conversation, celebrating Seniors Month in October across Australia and the Day of the Older Person across the world, is basically that we as seniors often become those hard to reach communities. And without any gender discrimination, often women amongst the seniors cohort seem to have this Hogwarts, invisibility cape around us. And we seem to be those blurred sepia tone photographs of 50 years ago where you can barely see Nana in the picture. Excuse me, we're not. We're very much here, 110% present. And I know that all the speakers who spoke before me will agree that we are 110% present to advocate, to support, and to speak for those hard to reach voices. Having said that, moving from hard to reach to hardly reached is not enough. I think it's important that I share with you all some of the ways we can do that. So, practical tips to help us to look at a particular community or cohort or network or organization and think to ourselves, some of those who have power in our hands to be able to make the change. So, what do we do? How do we put this across so that everyone can adopt and work with it? So, one of the ways is planning for outreach. If we want to look at organizations that we feel are not able to come to the table, have we really done the right communication to be able to get through to those communities? I remember a minister some years ago telling me, you know what? We put an advertisement in the Age. That's great, Minister. I just wonder how many of our marginalized communities are able to afford the Age, have the time to read the Age, and have the literacy, and I say this with great respect, to read an advertisement in the Age. So sorry, but we do need to plan. And I often recommend things like community radio. We do have community radio. We have SBS in Australia that has community channels. We have radio programs run by community groups. We do have letters and newsletters in faith centers. So if you want to speak to the Sikh community, send an email to a Gurdwara, for example, which is the Sikh temple. And I assure you, within 24 hours, before any government could act on it, there is one Sikh brother or sister who has put up that notice on the wall of the Sikh notice board. So there are ways that we can communicate with these organizations. But it's not enough to send out a newsletter or an advertisement. I think it's very important, and this is for our audience who's listening in today. It's really important to build trust. I think trust is sadly a word that has been underutilized in in these last few years that I've been working with communities. You can't just snap your fingers and expect that some of the communities who are present here today will just rock up to your session because they were really doing nothing at home. You have to, and I can see some of you nodding, we have to build the trust with these communities. I might not speak all the 300 languages and dialects that are spoken in Australia, but I speak the language of trust. And it doesn't need words, it needs actions. So if I can show communities that we have built this relationship of trust, and it's the same whether it's your family, your friends, your colleagues, your neighborhood, your church. If we have this, relationship of trust, then yes, we can go to these outreach engagement channels and get the communities to sign up. It's also very important to promote what many of us call as co-leadership. So it's not enough for one Rochelle or one Catherine, or I'm going to sound a bit pompous and say one Dilnaz. But it's not enough for just one of us to be around, ticking the boxes for all the different faiths, cultures, genders, socioeconomic, language, etc. We need to build capacity in our leaders, in our local grassroots leaders. We need to build capacity so that when we are not able to be there, we have this next generation. And I say generation not from the point of view of age, but generation from a point of view of another group of people who can stand up and say, Sister Dilnaz, I'm ready to take it on. Because that's what we want, not just for a few of us to be around, but for a generation to come up. It's also very important with trust and building capacity is to actually promote active connections. We need communities to know that they are a valuable resource. We need to let communities know that they are needed on the table. And I quickly give this example of some years ago standing on the steps of Parliament House, talking to a group of wonderful Burmese men and women. And they were thrilled to see me, and so was I. And they said, Sister Dilnaz, what are you coming here for? And I said, for this. They had the same letter in their hand. It was specifically for the Burmese community. I am not Burmese, and I don't speak any of the Burmese languages or dialects. But somebody in the House of Power had decided, let's tick the box and get Dilnaz onto the Burmese community. So it is important that we have connections in the community which are built on trust, which are built on advocacy, and have these community connectors, as I call it, ready to join hands and build the strength of different organizations. Most important of all is identifying needs. It is really important for government, for community, for corporate, for councils, for neighborhood houses, for anyone and everyone who wants to work with grassroots community to listen. And often, and I do say guilty, Your Honor, we are very keen to talk, but we're not there to listen to the real needs of the organization or the individuals we have in front of us. And with this listening to the needs and identifying the needs, we need to have cultural sensitivity. So what works for me may not work for you. What works for me because I may have literacy and fluency in English may not work for someone who may not have that, or whose cultural background is different. The way they have grown up is different, and the way they are aging is different. So we need to be very careful when we are speaking to groups of people, asking them what are their needs, that information is not lost in translation. And I don't mean that literally, though often it is. But we need to be careful that the language we're using is respectful, that we have cultural sensitivity, and that we allow them to speak. Not everyone goes with words. Not everyone goes with emails. Not everyone is comfortable with a poster. Sometimes it's actual storytelling. And for that, we may need a little more time. Sometimes food brings people together. So maybe hot samosas and chai might do the trick. Sometimes it's just allowing people to take their time to express themselves. And when you get it right, you sure get it right, because that feedback then actually drives strategy and policy in this country. I'd like to end by saying that when we're doing all this as service providers and as community advocates, we need to be careful that what we're developing is inclusive services. So when we're looking, and one of my speakers spoke about coming from Sierra Leone and then having years in Ghana and then coming to Australia and getting older as we age in this country. I came from India, but I lived and worked in the Middle East. So I saw a different cohort of men and women from the Middle East and how they were aging. And I've come to Australia, and part of my community work is multi-faith, multicultural, multilingual, and multi-generational, has helped me to see that if we're not welcoming and inclusive, we will never earn the respect of the community that we're looking at and hoping to bring to the table. So this is a message for anyone and everyone who's listening, that all of us, of course, need to stand up. We need to speak out. But along with the standing up and the speaking out, we also need to sit down sometimes and listen to what the community has to say. Because when we understand what their needs are, give them the respect that's due, build the trust, have active communication and connections, then in my personal experience, we've got it right. Yeah. Thank you.
That was absolutely wonderful, Tulnaz. Thank you so much. It's always just an absolute treat to hear you talk. You have so much fire in your belly, and you really take the fight to the people that need to hear it. And we're having a bit of a recipes for respect, which is a wonderful
I must acknowledge
the
this.
Seton project there.
Yes, because a lot of people who are in our audience may be aware, but for those who may not be aware, this is an amazing book that has built the capacity of many of my friends in this book. It's called Recipes for Respect, but it's not just about a recipe per se. It's about the recipe of friendship, trust, connections, communications, everything that I spoke about. And credit to Catherine Barrett, credit to Celebrate Aging, and credit to the city of Whitehorse, who, in a collaborative effort, did everything that I said before and got it right. So this is a good example of how communities and councils and thought leaders and advocates can work together to produce an amazing, colorful, beautiful, respectful book. And that's it, Rochelle. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you so much, Dilnaz. That was, as I said, absolute delight to hear from you as always. And I've been lucky to have a few conversations with you about your recipe for moving from, hard to reach to hardly reached, and really putting that onus out onto service providers and other people, not just leaving it sitting with the community. And here's something I prepared earlier, talking about recipes, like a cooking show, capturing, I think I've managed to capture the main points of what you have spoken to in terms of, really shifting away from the hard to reach to the hardly reached. And if I were to put you on the spot, Dilnaz, without notice, do you think that you would maybe be able to get the conversation starting with our audience in terms of, if we look at planning for outreach, would there be two things in particular you think that it's the most important aspects of that?
Yes, I think with planning for outreach, it's really important that we, do not depend on just one community group all the time or on one community leader. I think it's really important that we have to broaden our base. look at the different grassroots communities, see some of whom may not have been included in the past, and make that extra effort for getting in touch with those, hard to reach, as government and others say. It's really important, Rochelle, and this is to our viewers, it's really important that we do not have the same people doing the same thing all the time. It's important that we bring in new faces, new thoughts, new proposals, new lived experiences and expertise, so that those who are making the strategy, the policy, the process are able to be inclusive by looking at all the different thoughts and opinions that are being shared.
Beautiful. And then in terms of building trust, what would you think is the most essential ingredient or tip for service providers or engagement off the top of your head?
I actually go with 2 words. So it's important to have expertise in the room, but expertise is just the left hand. The right hand for the balance is the experience. And if we do not value the lived experiences of our communities, and they can be from some of the most horrifying lived experiences from where people have come to this wonderful country. And it can be, just a simple lived experience of, what you have done. So if we need to be able to balance the expertise and the experience. Once we get the expertise and the experience, I always say, A plus B is equal to C. We then get engagement, the kind of engagement that, no money can buy.
Yeah. Beautiful. So we've sort of covered building trust and planning for outreach. I don't have the PowerPoint in front of me, but I think the next is leading together. That co-leadership is something that I hear you talking about quite often. What do you think would be your top tip for people to know in terms of leading together, aside from expertise and experience?
I think, long ago, somebody had said, when I came to this country, when I was quite new, perhaps not as articulate and as confident as I was in the past, and I'm now. I think the very important thing is about respect. So it always comes back to respect. Dr. Catherine Barrett got the title right about Recipes for Respect, along with counsel, because if you show that you respect the people in the room, then there is no silly question and there's no silly comment. And then that gives people the freedom to actually think outside the box, not to be afraid to, communicate what they want. But as something you said earlier, Rochelle, whether we're listening with respect in this Congress or we're listening with respect, to 1,000 people in the room, I think if we show that we are genuinely respectful of who we're listening to and listening from, then I think we will have groups of people confident and comfortable to put up their hand and say, I can represent my community and speak.
Beautiful. I think the next box is active connections, which is something that you excel in. If you're very, very active in terms of bringing people together and connecting people, how do you think that we would be able to do that a little bit better as service providers?
I think we have
Just dropped my water bottle, sorry. Spilling on the floor.
I've just been given my coffee by my husband.
Beautiful. It's that time of day.
Yes. I think when we talk about connections, it's quite important. So for many of us who spoke today, whether it be from Winton or whether it be from, wherever you are, or Melbourne, we have grassroots communities around us. And it could be based on your faith, your culture, your age, your occupation. We have some wonderful teachers in this country who have made connections over generations. So I think it's very important that we listen to everyone and we're open-minded. So I might be from a particular country originally. I might be from a particular faith. I might be of a particular belief. But that doesn't mean that my heart and mind is not open to listening to others. So with what is happening on the global stage, I'm a member of many interfaith networks, multicultural networks. I always tell people that we have to come to the table with an open mind and an open heart. And if we have that ability to listen, to absorb, and to respond, then I think active connections are immediately formed. And yes, I have to add a good sense of humor and a thick skin. Yeah, there's no point taking everything personally. You live and learn. And I think a good sense of humor is really important because it brings its own energy into the room.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah. Today is the start of Seniors Month, and I have to share that I was at the World Day of Older Persons, and I took an hour off work in the morning to go to the U3A celebration in Nunawading, which is in the city of Whitehorse in Melbourne. And within the 1 hour, I danced line dancing, I danced Chinese dancing, I did rock and roll. I made this beautiful little origami crane, which is the symbol of peace coming out of Japan. And I made so many new connections.
Beautiful.
So I think, it's important to have that open mind and open heart.
That's an amazing, sounds like an amazing experience, all of that. I'd be there for the line dancing, definitely, along with the connecting with everybody. In terms of, just to keep us moving forward though, in terms of identifying needs, what would be your tips for how you are able to reach out and actually genuinely see what the needs of different marginalized communities are?
Yeah. So when we're looking at, say, our seniors and we're looking at women, and within that intersectionality, we're looking at, for example, multicultural and multi-faith women. Many of them, for example, may not have fluency in English. I think Fatmata said that, a lot of people come from different countries. And as we get older, often, as Dennis referred to, that with, mental health and with dementia, often we may lose the languages that we have learned in this country and go back to the language of our birth and our origins. And I see that all the time with so many, people. So it leads to a lot of isolation for these people, and they automatically become the hard to reach because they're not seen to be jumping up and down, putting up their hand and saying, hey, I want to go to this conference or this seminar. But it's not because they don't want to go. It's because they have limitations to attending. So I often suggest to, people who are designing services, and we did that in COVID. There are other ways of connecting. Email may not be the best, but WhatsApp, for example, or WeChat for a lot of people who speak Mandarin and Cantonese or in their own language, or maybe a colorful poster, maybe an animation, film or a video that basically explains simple English or plain English that can then be translated into plain language, which is the language of the choice of that community. It is not so hard, and it is not that expensive either. So there is no excuse to say we don't have resources or we don't have funding. We have done it at grassroots and done it successfully when there is an open mind and open heart to listen to the needs of that cohort. And, Auntie Becky is here today, and congratulations, Auntie Becky, on your OAM. I have seen with our First Nations brothers and sisters that their way of giving their feedback is a beautiful story. And you do not necessarily have to take copious notes. Just keep your ears open and your mouth shut and listen. Yeah. And if, as I said, guilty or honor, sometimes, we do the talking, not the listening. But I have been to some events where I've heard the story and it has been so powerful. And then, it's some drawings with it. And I'm thinking I could take this model and use it with a lot of communities where they don't have fluency in their own language. They can barely speak their own language. They still come to Australia and put a thumbprint instead of even a signature. So for these people, this kind of storytelling would be perfect. We just have to be able to see what the needs are and how do we capture that feedback, Rochelle.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dilnaz. I think a lot of what you were talking about then also sort of covered off on inclusive services. But is there anything that you would like to add further before we throw open to our audience for their suggestions about how we could move towards engagement with those hardly reached communities?
So I think with inclusive services, I've seen Services Australia with its different labels and different names over 25 years. I have seen us as, culturally and linguistically diverse. Now someone says we are calm, which is culturally and linguistically marginalized. English is a second language. So, it's a rose is a rose by any name. So we've had all these labels. But what I've seen with Services Australia, and it's a good example to give, is that now when they attend events, they have multicultural liaison officers, people who are at that event who are from that culture and speak that language. And to see, for example, at a Sikh event where the multicultural liaison officer is actually a Sikh community member makes such a big difference to the Sikh community to speak. And so would it be with Burmese or Greek or Italian or host of different cultures and languages. So that is a good example of inclusive services being provided. And similarly, with the government of Victoria, for example, I've seen some now that, when voting comes along for your, state elections, for example, it is quite difficult, especially for migrant communities, to understand above the line and below the line and everything in between. So there is a series of not just in language on the Parliament of Victoria website, but an actual animation in the language which tells you where you could put, the ticks. And there is something about engaging in democracy on the same website. Now, all that is an example of inclusive services.